fiction. Why not? And I think Jane and Alan and all the other lovely professors, Ann Cummins, who's not here because she's working on her house, or road tripping back to California, for letting me feel comfortable with fiction. So all these pieces are from a collection I'm working on that's on names. And these particular ones that I'm going to read tonight are all inspired in some way by reflections on time. So, okay, this first one's called Katrina, and it's actually going to be in the Microjournal of Literature this month. Katrina always wondered what her world would be like if she only had been born a month later, if only she wasn't premature, if only her birthday was September 4th, 2005, instead of August 4th. If she could have just stayed in there in the warm comfort of her mother's belly, her life would be so different. Maybe she wouldn't have been named after that granny. Maybe she'd be Hazel Orleans after the other one. What a different world she'd live in without the taunts and the calls, the horrible whispers whirling around her as she walked down the hall, at school, the playground, and the park. If she was Hazel, she'd be celebrating her heritage, her eyes like the changing sunset, eyes like her grandma Katrina, ironically. Granny Hazel, after all, had the bluest of blues like her mother, but not young Katrina. Granny Katrina's eyes of gold with flakes of grass and sky and dirt, they were the most interesting thing about her. The same could have been said for younger Katrina, too, if she had just been born in September. If it wasn't for that damn hurricane, she thought, which left her in the dark, stuck in an eternal storm that wouldn't let anyone forget, even there in Houston. Her name said it all. At least it said all that anyone ever wanted to hear. No one would listen past that. No one would look for the sunrise in her eyes. Instead, they felt the storm's touch. She just wanted someone to call her anything else. Her parents didn't understand. They didn't hear her demands, her pleas. When she spoke of this topic, they were swept back, torn to that year, that month, that week, that day, when the storm shredded their town, their street, their house, how their baby had almost been swept to sea off the porch of their drowning house. And how it was this terrible fright that saved all of their lives, for they jumped into the street's river to catch Katrina's floating bassinet. Their second story crashed into their first, following the roof. Katrina saved their lives as Katrina destroyed all around them. To them, Katrina was beautiful, name, face, and soul, and strong, just like her grandmother, who too saved their lives years before, in a world, a life before Texas, proof they could weather any storm, any time. Why would they let some old meteorological society's random appointment of names change their devotion to the women who saved them? They'd have none of that nonsense. They had it first. That meant something, but Katrina could not yet understand why. She was just going to have to prove to the world that she could be the hurricane and make a name for herself. If nothing else, when she was old enough, she'd contact the Social Security Administration and make Hazel official, not just the nickname she so desperately pleaded the other second graders to call her. Okay, this next piece is another flash piece that came out of studying some noir writing and film in Dr. Woodman's class last semester. And it has a futuristic sci-fi twist of Edward R. Murrow, who's a famous broadcaster, for those of you who don't know, from his anniversary of his McCarthy broadcast. We are not descended from fearful men, the box with wires and lights says as she sits waiting on the anniversary. She stares into its eyes. This is the sign. Beatrix slides on her boots and grabs the old handgun from the pocket she'd sewn under the chair. Outside, a man in black brimmed fedora sits inside a taxi. It's dark, but the street lamp gives away too much. She'd have to go out the back. It would take longer, but it's still possible. Beatrix grabs her hat and coat and shoves the gun in her left pocket, her hand gripping it tight as she sneaks the door shut. She goes out the gate, turns right, looks around. No one except the neighbor's cat, just like last time. His gray fur brushes against her leg. Each step barely makes a noise, but the sound rings in her ears. She drowns it out, repeating, "We are not descended from fearful men." Some 10,000 paces later, Beatrix turns right once more onto a crowded street. She blends in with the rest of the shadows tending to their calling. Nothing more, nothing less. Leaning on the chip brick facade, Beatrix watches the faces reflecting the amber lights. She wonders what it was like here 100 years ago. If people thought then about what it would be like now, if they'd have guessed life would be like this. There's my gal, the tall man says as he gives Beatrix a kiss, grabbing her right hand. Been waiting long? Beatrix shakes her head and leads him back around the corner. He smiles coyly with excitement as she pushes him against the wall. A muffled bang. His eyes scream wide as he slides slowly to the sidewalk. Good night and good luck, Beatrix whispers as she places the gun in his hand, firing it again into his heart. Beatrix turns left and walks back the way she came. The time, March 9, 2054. The place, the former Washington, D.C. The man, well, let's just say he's the one that almost got away. All right, this last one is called Frank, and it's a monologue. I wish an actor that actually knew how to act would be performing it, because I am not an actor in any way, but I love theater, so there you go. So the narration off the top, Frank is a man. Frank is alone on stage. He sits in a well-worn armchair with his feet resting on a small coffee table reading. A white curtain hangs on the wall. The rest of the stage is black. He is lit by a reading lamp next to the chair. At the rise, Frank is reading Faulkner's Requiem for a Nun. He reads a few sentences, looks up, puts the book on the table, and begins a direct address to the audience. You ever think about the history of a place, really think about it? Not just the superficial stuff, like what it looks like on the outside, or the really quote-unquote important stuff, or the famous stuff. Just the everyday stuff, and the good things and the bad things that happened right where you are right now. Maybe that's in a comfortable armchair in a hotel or your home. Maybe it's an office, or a theater, wherever. Do you wonder about the lives of the other people through time who sat right in that same space you occupy now? Really think about that. Did they leave anything there in this space that might end up changing your life somehow? Let me be more clear with an example, perhaps an airport. So we're in an airport. It's easy to think about this idea in an airport because the rate in which people pass through there, you're standing, no sitting, in a red seat by gate 5, terminal 1, 3 seats from where the line starts for when your flight boards. Someone else sat there waiting for their flight just an hour ago. Someone else, let's say 2 hours before him, yesterday, last week, and so on and so forth. You see where I'm going with this. Where was that person going? What were they having for dinner? What do they dream about at night? So, quite possibly you thought about that, right? Most of us do, I'd say, at some point. If not, you are now, about the person that sat in the seat that you're sitting in last night. We, most of us, I think you'd agree. We also think about the people who previously lived in the house where we live in now. Most likely you think about the first people, right? I know I do. I like to imagine the first people because I can see their work. They built my house. I know what they liked, right? I can see evidence of that still. I see their white tiles and their yellow wallpaper. Those people are pretty easy to wonder about. What they were thinking with this god-awful wallpaper and the shag carpet. How many kids did they have? What was their marriage like? Did they leave any buried treasure in the backyard or in a wall that is going to make you rich, right? Yeah, I know you thought about that too. And one day when you're doing your reno and you smash through that wall with your sledgehammer like the guy in the home show, you're going to find a treasure trove that's been waiting for you all this time. A time capsule, if you will. They put it there, maybe on purpose, maybe they just forgot about it, maybe they were hiding it and died. You know, whatever. Someone back then had something super secret special and they hid it out of sight. And you found it, you discovered it. Ha! Then you'd really know something about them. Maybe at that point you'd name a child after them, if it was a good enough find, right? If it made you a wealthy man. I know someone who actually had that happen. Not the kind of treasure you're thinking of, though. Nothing like that. No X marks the spot for the pot of gold. No, it was just a small notebook. Like this. The size of your hand. Not much from the outside, but from the inside, oh, that's a different story. Inside it, the man who wrote it, Luis Gonzalez to be exact about it, Luis, well, he had this little journal he kept out in the shed, out back of his house. The shed, it turns out, became his actual house. I know what you're thinking. How does a shed become a house, right? Well, in old historic districts in the West, in towns much like ours, it does. Apparently, old Luis and his wife Clementine weren't getting along anymore, and she made him go live in the shed. They couldn't get a divorce, but she wasn't going to have him in her house anymore. So Luis built his shed, and he turned it into a pretty nice place. He must Must have taken a while to put up real walls, though. He must have used the studs as shelves. That's where the notebook was found, on the inside of a wall, sitting on the horizontal beam like it was a bookshelf. And Luis told us himself that he turned the shed into his house. It's all right in here. Baby. He wrote about stuff like that in his little notebook, and all kinds of other stuff too, about his job at the railroad and the men he oversaw, things he didn't want to forget. He wrote it all down. He had all their names and their social security numbers. He even jotted down a few of their wives' names, and he had some sketches in there too. It's really neat to think about that. Here it is, 1942, and Luis has himself this house and his wife and 5 kids. And he's not the type of man that's necessarily going to make the history books or the papers. He's just a regular guy doing what he does, what we all do, day-to-day stuff, and he wrote it down in the notebook. What was most interesting to me in there were the sketches. They were all of women, different women, all types of women, not portraits, well, not the kind you're thinking of. They were all naked ladies, and they were doing some nasty things, some of them. You can imagine, dirty pornography things. They've got fingers in places and things wide open. Some are, let's say, aerial shots of certain acts in progress. They're quite artistic. Luis was very talented, had a good eye. He could sketch really well, lifelike. He captured the details so stunningly. Makes you want to smell the flowers. The flowers look so real, if you know what I mean. I know you do. Yeah, so it's nice work, the kind you'd see a man would want to keep secret, keep tucked away. And you'd give him that, probably while he was living in the shed in the first place, this artistic work, you know. But something clearly happened to Luis between page 40 and 41, because some of the drawings, well, they're not as nice as the ones I just told you about. Some are bondage, some are cut up, and by cut up, I mean cut up. They were definitely not alive anymore, they were in pieces. And at first, you'd like to think that Luis had an active, sick imagination, but it becomes clear later on in the notebook that's not the case. He started numbering them, and on body number 14, looks like a little blood splatter got on the page there. Sure, it could be mud or something, but it's not. Luis went back and traced around the splats, and on the next few pages he described what he did, how he was keeping track of all the things he didn't want to forget, how he had started in this line of work. Oh, and I say work because it was his profession. He did this for profit. He quit the railroad quite early into the notebook. He was doing both jobs for a while, but the killing, it's clearly how he paid for the wife's house and his shed, which also became my house, actually. We're getting into the details of it. I figured you might want to know that. It took him a while to get to confessing in the notebook, but it turns out Luis professionally disappeared people back in 1942 until at least 1950. And it wasn't just women either. He disappeared men and women, never says anything about families, but couples, he did some of those. The notebook was like his ledger by the end. Doesn't seem like he ever got caught, at least by the right people, the police I mean. Because as I said, Luis didn't make the papers, not even when he died, whenever, however that was. Never officially died, actually, I looked. He's not anywhere in the Daily Post. He never existed according to history. Well, that's not all true. His name is listed as the original builder and owner of the house behind mine, the wife's house. Her family still lives there. Her kids kept it in the family all these years, and I talked to them about Luis. Oh, he existed. They don't know much or say much about him, but he did live here. The last entry in the notebook is June 1950. That's about the time the shed became an official house with an official address, not just a shed anymore. Property records say 1951 it was officially built. That's probably when they made the walls and this notebook got all walled up inside. Maybe that's just when Luis got himself disappeared. That's what I put together, at least. I never told my wife or neighbors or anyone except for you right now that I found this. I've been keeping it in my own special hiding place since we knocked down a few of the walls for that open concept everyone's raving about. That's where I found it. I tucked it in my boot when it fell on the floor, open to one of those nudie pics. It was so artfully done, I thought I just might want to look at that in private later. No need to upset anyone, I say. It's not the kind of secret you want to let people know you're holding on to for someone else. But it has made me think a lot. Think about the people who lived in my house before me and the people before them and before them, all the way back to Luis. And then I started thinking about hotels and who has stayed in the rooms I've stayed in or sat in the seats of the airport I've sat in. Have I sat where one of those 9/11 people sat as they waited to board their final flight? How How many seats of other dead men have I occupied? And I've started thinking about other people's houses too, like your house, and what has happened there that you don't know about. Who exactly lived there before you? What else might Louise have left in the walls of its other house? Who else sat right there in the very seat you're sitting in right now, listening to someone else confess another man's dark secrets? Ask yourself that, I tell you, and you're not going to sleep well tonight either.